You're about to see how players of different levels calculate variations in chess and what you can do to improve your calculation skills within the next 10 minutes. It is white to move, and if you want to take it seriously, you may pause the video, think about the solution, write it down in the comments below, and after that resume the video and we'll discuss it together. Anyway, here's what's interesting. This position was given to players of different rating levels, and so we know exactly how they think. Alright, so the first guy who tried this position was a 1600 rated guy. So here's the lines variations that he thought about. So you can compare it with your thinking process. Now, that player considered the move bishop to d5. And he figured out that bishop d5 attacks the rook, and it cannot be captured because this knight has to guard the e8 square, meaning if knight goes, white doesn't have to retake. He can go rook e8 with the back rank checkmate after the exchange. So that wins for white. Therefore, the bishop cannot be taken, and it attacks the rook. But then he rejected this move because he figured out that the rook can simply go back and then possibly capture this pawn on d7. The next line he considered was rook to e8, definitely a tempting move which is worth calculating. Now black clearly needs to recapture. What can white do next? If white simply takes there, black recaptures by the queen, and white is down material, that doesn't give white anything. After that, he tried to play some other move here. He considered queen to d5, trying to create all these threats on the next move, but then he realized that black can play rook e6 and both cover the rook as well as cover this diagonal, meaning that currently black is up a rook and white has nothing. He rejected this line. After that, he thought for some more time and considered bishop takes f7, trying to get the king out. After that, black recaptures, and what if white goes queen to d5 here with a double attack? After some thinking, he realized that it still doesn't work because of the same move rook to e6, and still white has nothing. White could possibly capture here, but at the end of the day, it's just down a rook for white. Doesn't work. After thinking for some longer time, he found the move queen to d5, which is indeed a much more interesting attempt. By the way, did you find this move on your own? Anyway, let's figure it out because there is more to come here. So queen d5 basically pursues the same idea. It attacks this rook, as well as it creates a battery along this diagonal, and it hits the pawn on f7. Now, the knight still has to guard the e8 square. We know this from one of the previous variations. If knight ever moves, even if it captures the queen, that still loses to rook e8 and back rank checkmate. So black can't capture the queen, meaning that it's not really even a sacrifice. But black needs to deal with the attack of these two areas. And what about rook to e6? That's the line that the 1600 rated player calculated. Now, in this case, white can actually capture here, and after this trade on e6, this checks the king. So the player calculated up to this point and decided that white won a pawn, checks the king, this pawn d7 is drawn, and it must be good for white. So that was the end of the calculation for this player. But overall, even though I'm showing very quickly, for the guy it actually took half an hour to figure out all these variations. Alright, moving on to the next student. He was rated 2000. Now, what was his thinking process? Initially, it was more or less the same. Initially, he checked immediate checks, bishop takes f7, realized it doesn't work, black recaptures, rook e8, realized it doesn't work because the knight recaptures, and then he found the move queen to d5 and got really excited about this and decided that that's the end of story, that's the victory. So white hits these two squares, and if the queen is captured, here comes rook e8, back rank checkmate. In a way, it was kind of a little bit strange because although he's found this move much faster, so it took him 2 minutes to figure it out, actually it was kind of even more superficial compared to a lower rated 1600 rated player because this guy did not even calculate the move rook to e6. Anyway, that was his solution. Queen d5 wins, and he spent about 2 minutes to find this move. Let's talk about Grandmasters. How did they solve this position? And by the way, kudos to Michael Adams, the legendary English Grandmaster, who presented this exercise in his book, Think Like a Super GM, and he solved this position himself. Now, here's what's interesting. Remember the first guy, 1600 rated. He spent half an hour, 30 minutes, to come up with the move queen to d5. Now, for Michael Adams, he spent 30 seconds to reject this move queen to d5. And here's what Adams said about it. Of course, I'm kidding. Somehow I just laughed his villain laughter. Anyway, going back to the position. So initially, Adams thought about the same things. He thought that bishop takes f7 doesn't work, rook e8 doesn't work. Then he found the move queen to d5. But here's the difference. Remember, like the 2000 rated guy just decided that it wins. The 1600 rated calculated rook e6 and decided that white wins there. Now, Michael Adams rejected this move because of queen takes d7. He realized that this actually covers the rook as well as this pawn, and the queen is defended. So if white takes over there, black recaptures, and if white tries this check, black can cover. And white achieved nothing as a result of this. After that, Adams found the right move within the next a minute or so. Now, I don't know exactly how he thought about it, but I solved this position myself, and I'm also a Grandmaster, so I can share with you exactly how I did this, and I think it's going to be insightful because you can get inside of a brain of a Grandmaster and see exactly how he thinks. Alright, so here's how I think about positions. Now, first of all, when I'm trying to find the right move, I'm thinking about the strongest and forcing moves. And forcing moves are checks, captures, and attacking moves. And in order to find them, I primarily focus my attention on opponent's half of the board, because if you can go there and capture something or attack something, those moves are the strongest. And it makes your task much easier, because initially, if you just look at the position, there are tens of different moves that white can possibly play, right? And we're not computers, we cannot calculate all that. And we don't need to, because we need to only find the best move. So I'm focusing on the best moves, most aggressive moves, all right? Attacking moves, forcing moves on opponent's half of the board. And I consider them first. So when I solve this position, I also quickly check these kind of moves, and I realize that they don't work. But besides that, my thinking process goes like this. I focus my attention on opponent's half of the board, and then I look for candidate moves. So I start from the queen, the highest value piece, and then I go down to the rook and the bishop so that I don't forget about any other piece, right? So if we're looking at the queen, I'm looking at the forward directions, and I'm seeing if there's any forcing attacking move that I can play there. So for example, I look at this direction. Is there any forcing attacking move there? No, there is nothing. I'm looking at this direction. Is there any forcing attacking move there? If I go here, here, no, there's nothing. Okay, so I reject this. Now, if I look at this direction, is there any forcing attacking move there? And especially, I'm trying to go forward. Remember that, right? So I usually prefer playing opponent's half the board as much as I can, right? So I initially check queen d6 in my mind and queen d5, right? So here I would find that queen d5 is interesting, and I would remember this move is one of the candidate moves. So it's worth calculating. Now let's go next. Let's go to the rook. Again, we are trying to go forward, starting from the most advanced square, rook e8. We check if this works or not. If it doesn't, we take a square back, rook e7. Oh, and by the way, you see that it is something interesting. Rook e7 actually hits this pawn twice with your bishop and rook, and the rook cannot be captured because then it would give way to your d7 pawn to be promoted. So this would be pretty bad for black, right? White would just win the game. So rook e7 also looks very interesting. That's a move with the rook. And as for the bishop, I mean, that's bishop takes f7. It doesn't work because of king takes f7. Now for me, I did not even think about the move bishop to d5, honestly, even though other guys thought about this move. I didn't, because in my view, it's just a less aggressive move. You know, black can move the rook away, bishop d5 doesn't seem to be doing anything. So from my perspective, I would first try to calculate the most forward, most aggressive, most forcing moves first, like queen d5 and rook e7, because if one of them works, that would be the best, and I won't have to calculate anything else. So I first consider most aggressive, strongest options. Now, if I consider these both moves and it turns out that both of them don't work, only then I would settle for less aggressive, second best move, so to say. Then I would start calculating something like, okay, how about bishop d5, or maybe just rook d1, simply trying to hold on to this pawn on d7 because it's being attacked, right? So some less aggressive options, right? But for now, I don't even need to. So for now, I just want to calculate queen to d5 and rook to e7. All right, now after queen d5, here's another interesting thing. We noticed that 1600 rated guy calculated the move rook to e6. But strong players know that they need to calculate forcing moves, checks, captures, attacking moves, both for themselves as well as for their opponent. Because, you know, calculation for your opponent is no different than your own, right? Your opponent has an equal say in the game. So if we think about your opponent, we gotta consider the same forcing moves, checks, captures, attacking moves. That's how you can easily find the move queen to d7. And that's the difference. So GMs found that move, queen to d7, because they're focused on forcing moves. Like, can't make any checks. Is there any capture? Yes, there is queen to d7. By the way, the same move was missed by lower rated players in the variation bishop to d5. Remember, the guy rejected because of rook to c7, and GMs rejected bishop d5 because they found that black can still play queen to d7, and this time it actually pins the bishop, so it can't move, and now it's just completely bad for white. In fact, white's probably losing. They lost a pawn, and now the bishop is attacked, and it's pinned, so it's completely bad for white. Now, here comes the next part. Why is it that GMs found the move rook e7, which lower rated players could not find? I think the reason is that it is natural for us to think about chess in terms of looking at the pieces that you have and thinking where they could possibly move. While, as we talked about a little bit earlier, the more aggressive approach is slightly different. Is when you focus on opponent's half of the board and ask yourself basically how you can go there and create some devastation, how you can terrorize your opponent. So that's the question that you ask yourself, really. And that just shifts your perspective, because instead of considering moves such as, queen e3 and then queen e8, queen e2 attacking this pawn or something, you focus on this side and you check, okay, what are all these moves forward where you can play them, right? So that gives you a totally different perspective of the situation. So that's how GMs found the move rook to e7. Anyway, let's explore this move. Now, we know that queen can't take it because the pawn gets promoted. But what can then black do? When I thought about this, I decided to ask a question differently. I decided to ask a question, what is white's major threat? Because yeah, we're attacking this pawn, but it's just one pawn. It's not a super big problem for black. So what's the actual big threat? Is there any threat? Because otherwise I couldn't come up with the right move for black, not knowing what's the actual threat to defend from, right? And after thinking about this and asking myself what's the actual big threat that white has here, I realized that the threat is bishop takes f7. Let's say I play some random move for black just to see what white is going to do. Bishop takes f7, on the next move, regardless of where the king goes, I can follow up with rook e8, just taking advantage of this pawn, which is almost promoted to a new queen, and now white wins. So realize that that's the actual threat that we have. Now let's take it back and let's see if black can do anything to defend against it. I thought about it, I couldn't really find it, because even if black tries to escape there, bishop takes f7, even if black tries to escape from the last rank, we can still check it, force it back to the last rank, and then still push through the same idea. So that's one of the winning variations that white can use here. To sum up, there are three major differences between an average player versus a grandmaster. Number one is focus your attention on your opponent's half of the board and try to go there. Those moves are the strongest. Number two is consider forcing moves. Checks, captures, and attacking moves for yourself, they are the strongest. And number three is consider forcing moves for your opponent as well. Consider checks, captures, and attacking moves. They are the strongest and they have the potential to refute your idea. By the way, this puzzle shows if you have the chess talent, and if you haven't tried it before, check it out right here. I've got a dedicated video about it. Take care.